This is a recording of a July 19th, 2025 event, Integrating Mind and Spirit, featuring Dr. Joan Walton. Welcome. We're the Sacred Inclusion Network. We do these events once a month. And if you want to find more about us, please look at our website, sacredinclusion.com. You have the, I don't want to say privilege, you're now on our mailing list. If you don't want to be on our mailing list, please just delete us, or delete us when you get the next email. And without too much ado, I'm just going to give her a brief sort of formal welcome. She'll tell you more about herself. I do want to introduce Joan Walton, and I personally am impressed with her background, so I'll say some of these things. I hope you don't mind, Joan. Joan is the chair of the Executive Committee for the International Network of the Study of Spirituality. She's the chair of the board of directors of the Scientific and Medical Network, whatever that is, and a member of the Galileo Commission steering group. And she's at the forefront of this research in spirit and science. And we're very, very delighted to have her. Welcome, Joan, and the floor is yours.
Right, thank you, Angelo, and delighted to meet all of you. Most of you I've not met before, so yeah, hopefully by the end of the session we'll know each other a little bit more. I'm hoping to make this more interactive, so to give plenty of time for discussion and questions. But when looking at what Angelo had sent out and what he states my kind of professional academic expertise is, I thought it might be good just to start by telling you the story of how I come to be here today and how I come to have this interest and how I come to see the relationship between spirituality and consciousness, which actually I see is very, very closely connected, which you'll perhaps understand more about by the time I've finished. So really, my story goes way back to when I was a child. I was born the daughter of Church of Scotland missionaries. I'm Scottish by birth, although you won't hear much of the accent because I've lived away from there for many years. But I was born in Africa, in Kenya, and was there till I was nearly 5. It was the time of the Mau Mau, so my parents were sleeping with guns under their pillow to protect us from possible violence, etc. So I wasn't in Africa too long, but I was brought up in the Christian church, and a fairly strict form of my parents were very, very strict in terms of Christian principles, and I lived that, went to church every week, went to Sunday school every week, and didn't really question it until the age of 16, when I was in confirmation classes. I was going to confirmation classes, and I don't know what caught my attention, but something that the minister was saying must have struck me, because I said to him, so are you saying if I become confirmed, I believe what you are just saying and what the Bible says? And he says, well, yes. And I said, well, if I'm saying I can't believe it, are you saying that I shouldn't be confirmed? And he just looked slightly startled and said, well, probably not. And so I said, okay. And I got up and left, which I saw as the obvious thing to do. It didn't worry me too much. When I got home and told my mother what I'd done, she was horrified, and I realized she felt my soul was at risk. And I remember feeling very conflicted at that time, because here was I, who was quite matter of fact about not believing in the kind of Christian tradition and not feeling bad at any level about it all, and yet the person who loved me most was feeling that my soul was threatened. So that set up a bit of a challenge for me at an early stage, which I engaged with for some time. I think probably for about 3 or 4 years. I was suspended between, I was never an atheist. I always knew there was a reality wider than the one that we live in, a reality that existed beyond that, which we experienced with our 5 senses. I knew that. And science at school never attracted me at all, because science was all about the material world and unpicking it and analyzing it. And I was always interested in a reality that existed beyond the material world. But I had no answer, no response to these kind of questions about, well, it's not matter and it's not Christianity, then what is it? And when I was 19, I read Carl Jung's autobiography, Memories, Dreams, Reflections. I don't know if anyone here has read that, but I read it, and it had a huge influence on me. For one, Carl Jung had similar experiences. I connected with some of his childhood experiences. He was brought up in a Christian family and wrestled with some of the issues in there. And he introduced me to the whole concept of the unconscious. I got very interested in depth psychology. I got a book by P.W. Martin called An Experiment in Depth, and I started experimenting with what Jung calls the active imagination. So started delving quite deep into my own consciousness, to my own interiority, and started a form of writing, would do a kind of automatic journaling. And that went on for some time. And at the same time, I was working in residential childcare, working with kids who had been traumatized and not feeling equipped to help them. They were kids from very disadvantaged backgrounds and acted out their behavior in often very violent ways and very disturbed ways. And I felt I just wasn't old enough to look after myself, far less look after them. So I decided that I would at that stage go to university and try and get the knowledge that I needed to help these kids in care, or kids who were not able to live with their own families. And kind of accelerating forward a bit, I realized that actually even I qualified as a social worker, and I engaged in social work practice for a number of years, both in residential work and community work, child and family work, and realized that actually social work practice was like putting a plaster on a kind of huge gaping wound, and that was never going to address the social problems and the trauma that many children were experiencing. So, and the conclusion I came to then, being influenced by Jung and ideas about consciousness, was that we were not going to create a better world for children to live in until we had a transformation in consciousness, which meant a transformation in our understanding of consciousness and actually a transformation in our experience of consciousness. So the whole idea of consciousness became very central to my life and my exploration. And Angelo said that I'm chair of the board of the Scientific and Medical Network, and said he didn't have a clue what that was. If I fast forward through my life a little bit, I was engaged in, if you like, a spiritual journey. I've always felt I've been on some kind of spiritual journey, understanding that there's more to life. I've had an interest in consciousness, but there was a period through my 30s where it just took a low profile. I had a daughter, I was working quite hard, I was setting up my own business. And then in 1994, my partner and soulmate died very, very suddenly of a heart attack, and my daughter was only 11 at the time. And that threw me into a real kind of existential crisis for possibly obvious reasons. I have written about this in other places, so I won't say much here, but all to say that 6 months down the road, I just felt at rock bottom, and I was going to a retreat in Herefordshire in the UK. And on the first day there, it was a silent retreat. It was the first time I'd actually experienced a silent retreat. And I read the Celestine Prophecy by James Redfield, which, if anybody's read it, they say it looks at the kind of path towards spiritual development. And the first sign that you're on that path is a recognition of synchronicities, which had always been quite a large part of my life anyway. And the following day, when I'm in the library of this retreat centre, I pick up a leaflet for the Scientific and Medical Network. And I just looked at it and thought, this is the place where I can find people I can share my journey with, because up to that time it had felt a very lonely and isolating journey. There weren't many people around who had got this sense of a wider dimension, but also an interest in consciousness and an ability to share some of the experiences around there. So the Science and Medical Network has actually been, Scientific and Medical Network has actually been in existence for 52 years. And when I joined it, and the reason it started was, the reason for the name is that it was started by scientists and doctors who were educated in materialism. They were educated that matter is the primary substance of the universe, and all their training was based on that assumption, but they themselves didn't necessarily believe that, but they couldn't afford to talk about it in their profession. Otherwise, it would just have counted against them. It was not something they could talk about. And they wanted to find a safe place where they could share with others of like minds what they were experiencing. And so the Scientific and Medical Network was created to provide that safe place for them. And that was, if my timing is right, 1973. So it was about 22 years already in existence when I joined. And so I have been a member of that ever since, and it has been a major part of my exploration. But basically, one of its main aims is to integrate science, consciousness, and spirituality. So it gave me a forum through which to explore the relationship between those three aspects of my life at that point in time. And since then, I wrote my own PhD. I started my own PhD triggered by the death of my partner and the trauma. I was exploring what on earth, can life really have meaning when something so awful as this can happen? And I was very close to giving up on this idea that there was any meaning and purpose to life, because I just couldn't make sense of what had happened. And so I started off on this very active spiritual journey and ultimately wrote that up as my PhD, the title of which is Ways of Knowing. Can I find a way of knowing that satisfies my search for meaning? And it really was a kind of narrative account of my experience, informed by critical reading of all the literature that I've been reading along the way, and tracked my journey to, feeling more positive about the whole process and seeking to come to some understanding of the nature of suffering apart from anything else, which of course is one of the kind of core questions. So following my PhD, which I actually got in 2008, that was the point in which I joined a university. And so I joined the university and became an academic at a very late stage of my career. And one of the main aims of joining the university was that I was very keen that that PhD thesis should not sit on shelves and gather dust. I had felt that most doctoral work was about people just finding out more and more about less and less, and to be largely theoretical, and didn't really make a difference to anybody's lives. And I had met in my professional world so many people who were making a positive difference in the world. They had developed knowledge and skills over the time, and I felt that they deserved to have some kind of legacy. And so my role there was to encourage people to inquire into and write up an account of their professional lives and how they sought to improve their practice and make a positive difference in the world, and write it in a way that gave them academic credibility. And very often doing that through forms of action research, which enables people to start with their experience, to reflect on that experience, then to theorize, conceptualize, what's going on, make sense of it, think about how they can improve it, how they can make it better, and then to test those new ideas out in practice, and to write that up in a way that was rigorous, systematic, and obviously it kind of contests this traditional scientific view of what constitutes knowledge, of what constitutes evidence. But as long as you can argue the case in your thesis, then it merits that kind of award. So that is largely what I came into the university to do. Alongside that, in the process, I have developed my interest in consciousness and spirituality. And if we come up to the present day, one of my reasons for playing such a role in a number of different organizations in the way that I have and that I am, is that I'm trying to create alliances between different organizations who have got this interest in consciousness and spirituality, or the relationship between them. And in fact, in the International Network for Study of Spirituality, we started a special interest group, which the question running it on a collaborative inquiry, the question guiding it was, what is the relationship between consciousness and spirituality? And we met once a month for over 2 years, and then that ended up in a webinar where 7 of us shared what we'd learned from that process and what we understood the relationship to be. Our views on it were quite diverse. If any of you are interested in it, it's still there available to watch. We didn't necessarily come to an agreement, but the process of the discussion as we went along, it bonded us very, very closely as a group, and we shared some very deep stuff, very profound stuff. We all felt very appreciative of where each person had taken that, but we did recognize that each of us had a unique way of experiencing that. In the present day, now I'm a chair of the Scientific and Medical Network, and really interested in bringing together this science, consciousness, spirituality. I'm actually the first female chair of the network in its 52 years history, so I'm quite pleased about that. Thank you. So what I'm trying to do is just to increase, I'm making I'm really differentiating, trying to bring in some more feminine energy, recognizing that many men have feminine energy and women have masculine energy. So it's really about bringing in more feminine energy, bringing in more younger people, and also beyond that, looking at how we understand what it means to be consciousness. So I relate consciousness and spirituality very closely together, which I can say more about in a while. I can now kind of move on to the initial thing in Angelo's brief about me, which is what is the evidence for non-materialism, for materialism not being the basis of reality, which is what society commonly assumes. But before that, because I've spoken so much already, I'd just like to perhaps open up to any questions or anything that's gone through people's mind just for a few minutes before I move on with any more input. So if anybody feels they would like to comment or ask or share something at this stage. Although if there's total silence, I will move on, but I just feel that I'd like to give you that opportunity.
Joan, I would just like to, if this isn't probing too much and asking you to be too private,
Fine. No.
I'd love to hear in your talk something about the existential crisis you experienced upon suffering a loss. Will you be speaking somewhat about that, or
I wouldn't do later, but if you would like me to, I have got no problem doing so, Emil. It's not, I've got no reservation, and I have done in other places, but so I'm happy to do so.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll share a bit about that because it was a very pivotal time in my life. My daughter, I think, as I said, was 11. I had for some time had a relationship with Jerry, who's not my daughter's father, but my daughter had a kind of, bit of a difficult relationship possibly with her dad, and she just loved Jerry completely. And we had been looking for a house to buy together. And Rachel had taken the kind of lead in finding the house. And we'd found one which we just felt was our perfect place. It was in a rural setting. It had a big garden. It had woods and nature at the back. And it was in a different area. So we were going to move area not too far away, but it meant that Rachel had to move school. And she was coming to the end of her primary education. She was 11, so she was coming to the end of her primary school, and she was going to start secondary school in a different area. And she was just super excited about this new life that she was going to start, to the extent that she had put up on the side of her wall a chart counting down the number of days to her new life. And the last day of her school was to be Friday, the 22nd of July. So we're coming up fairly close to that date at the moment, in fact. And we had bought this new house on the 5th of July. We weren't actually living there. We were living elsewhere because Jerry was working on the house. He was doing a lot of work to try and get it in a state for us to live in. It had been a repossessed house, so it needed quite a lot of work doing for it. So we bought it on the 5th of July, and he'd been working more or less full time on it with a couple of friends from the beginning of the 5th of July. On the 22nd of July, which was the Friday when Rachel finished school, we were going to go away on holiday. We've got 2 weeks holiday planned, and then we were going to come back and settle in the house and move on into what Rachel was calling her new life. So on the 21st of July, Rachel went to bed, hugely excited. She'd crossed off the last day on her chart. The next morning, she was going to wake up and start her new life. And that evening, Jerry hadn't come back from the house. He was still working, doing some work on the house. And I was getting slightly concerned because it was getting quite late. So I phoned him up, and it was his workmate who answered the phone, which was very unusual. And I just said, "Oh, could I speak to Jerry?" And he told me that a short while before, Jerry had had a heart attack and had died on the spot, and they had just called the ambulance, and the ambulance was on its way. And so I was just receiving that devastating news on my own, with Rachel upstairs in bed and not knowing how to deal with it. So about 2 o'clock in the morning, I just went up to Rachel's bed and just lay down beside her, and she came to, and I just told her what had happened. And then in the morning, she came down and said, "Mum, I had a dreadful dream." And then she looked at my face and just said, "It wasn't a dream, was it?" So she woke up on what was to be, she was so excited, was to be the first day of her new life. And it was a new life, but it was completely the opposite of what she had been hoping or what she'd been wanting. And the house at that stage, because we kind of were doing a lot of work on it, wasn't really fit to live in. We had to live in a caravan in the front for a while to allow it to get into a habitable state. And I think, as you can imagine, it was devastating for both of us. And part of the devastation for me was the timing of it. The reason I've spent so much time explaining what was leading up to it was it just seemed so cruel to do this to an 11-year-old child. You know, for that to happen any time would have been difficult and devastating, and the loss would have been awful. But for that timing to happen in that way, I couldn't get over the apparent cruelty of it. And so that rocked me. I was pretty strong in my belief that there was a kind of meaningful world beyond what we knew. I hadn't questioned that very much, but that the death of Jerry caused me into a spiral that led me to question that extremely. I have to say that, you know, beforehand, you imagine these things happening, and I'd imagined that nothing much could happen to rock me. I could deal with poverty. I could deal with lots of things. The only thing I wouldn't deal with were the death of Jerry or the death of Rachel, and one of those two things had happened. So when I imagined in advance something like that happened, I always thought I just couldn't handle it. If something like that happens, I'm just going to disintegrate. I'd fall apart at the seams. I just wouldn't be able to function anymore. And that was what I expected to happen. And actually, two things occurred. One probably to be expected, the other not so much so. what happened was the support of other people. I mean, people who I didn't know very well, the amount of warmth and support that came in to alongside me was beyond what I could have envisaged. But more significantly, I just, I felt myself beginning to crumble. I just, I'd always thought I will fall apart at the seams, and I could almost feel myself disintegrating. And then what happened, and it was a really, I can feel it now, is almost a visceral experience. This kind of white canopy just came up from below and just held me. It caught me. So it was like I fell off something, and there was this parachute the wrong way round. This just first canopy just was there, and it held me. And so I didn't disintegrate, and I didn't fall apart at the seams. It was a spiritual experience. There's no doubt that was a spiritual experience at quite a deep level. And so that was kind of quite contrasting. Here was this awful thing happening in a way that made me question everything. And yet I have these other things come in that still suggest that there's something more going on. So, Emil, that's the essence of it, really. I spent the rest of, and the way I dealt with it in my mind was, intellectually, I couldn't accept there was meaning in a world where such a thing could happen. On the other hand, I didn't want to give up completely. I mean, the temptation to just give up and say life's pointless, start drinking, start overeating, getting into forms of addictive behavior, not bother with work anymore, just neglect myself. The temptation just to give up on life felt quite strong, but I just couldn't do it. I couldn't give up on life. And so the only way I could move forward was to accept the hypothesis. I accepted the hypothesis that there was meaning and purpose to life. I accepted the hypothesis that despite the awfulness of this situation, there was ultimately some meaning to it that I couldn't at that time understand. But I had to hold on to that possibility that there was, because otherwise I just couldn't envisage any other way forward. And the hypothesis didn't let me down. I mean, life's tough and life's challenging, but I still felt that despite that devastation, there is a coherence to life. I think that kind of safety canopy, helped me feel that there's something that keeps you together and keeps you going. And just to, in a sense, to complete that scenario, I always felt that Jerry was there and supporting for various reasons. Not that I ever saw him necessarily, but there were things happened in my life in a more positively synchronistic way that I just felt Jerry definitely is there supporting me. And then Rachel herself had a very tangible experience when she was 17, 6 years later, when she first got her driving test. Got a driving license, and she had friends who lived about 15 minutes away, which necessitated her driving on a cross-country route down a narrow country lane. And partway down this lane, there was a canal with a humpback bridge over it, and you couldn't see the other side of the humpback bridge. So custom and practice was that when you came to the bridge, you would just slow down, go up it super slowly, and then someone the opposite way, if they were coming, they'd do the same. You'd see each other and one would back away. It hardly ever happened because it was a very quiet road, but just in case, that was what you did. So Rachel's driving along in the car, the music's blaring, she comes to the bottom of she comes to the humpback bridge, she slows down to a crawl, and then she gets to the bottom of it and she can't move her foot. It won't press the accelerator. She's trying to put her foot on the accelerator and it won't move. And at that moment, there comes from the other side this car, just at a tremendous speed, comes over the humpback bridge, lands down to beside her with a bump and races on. And Rachel's just, wow. And at that point, her foot moves again and she can start going up. And at that point, at the same time, there's this feelings of Jerry just floods her consciousness. He's just there. And so she's driving on, and you know, bemused by all of this, my foot not moving, Jerry's there in her mind, she's going on in her journey. And then as she progresses, she realizes, one, that if her foot had moved in the accelerator, if she had done as she normally would, she would have been killed outright. And she felt in that moment that the awareness of Jerry was him coming in and intervening to safeguard her. So that was a very powerful experience that, in a sense, gave some tangible evidence that he was still there in some way and positively influencing our lives. So, but I've said, one of the things, I mean, I'm involved in a very deep spiritual journey, and you know, when you think about what was the meaning of it, I wouldn't be here talking to you today if that hadn't happened. I think my life would probably have been much more superficial. And I do feel that I'm involved in some meaningful things at the moment and connecting with people on a similar deep, meaningful journey. So I still don't comprehend exactly why something like that to happen, but I do have a sense that there is a bigger picture there, and that all those who have passed, who we are close to, are still there playing a part in it all in some kind of way, if we're open to that possibility, and if we're open to connecting them, we can feel their connection with us. And I have considerable evidence of that in my own personal life, really.
Thanks, Joan. I've known you for some years, but thank you for all you've shared there. Yeah. Gosh, I was nearly moved to tears hearing about your daughter.
Yeah, I can still feel it even now, Michael. You know, when I go back to that night and the last cross on her sheet, I think I might still challenge some being on some day about the timing of that. But yeah, there's a bigger picture for it all. So, and it has had damage on her. You know, she has had you know, I do think it's affected her ability to feel happy. She always feels that she can't afford to get too happy because something might come in and adversely affect that. She doesn't think that's what causes it, but I have a sense that that's had an adverse effect on her ability to allow herself to be completely happy. So, okay, any other comments or questions? I'm very happy to respond to anything.
Joan, do you mind if I ask you, it's a bit different, I know, but what was it about Christianity when you were getting confirmed or faced with the possibility of being confirmed that made you say no and walk away?
Yeah, and this is a difficult question for me to answer to you, especially Michael, because and you know, I've got people who are very committed to the church. I'm kind of I get adversely affected by language which talks about guilt and sin. I think I can summarize it in that kind of way. I don't get angry now, but at one point in time, I got really angry about language that suggests we are born sinful, we are born guilty, and we need to keep repenting our sins and talking in that kind of language. I am quite the opposite in that I believe, I will in a moment, I will actually move on and share with you my kind of ontological view of the world in a little bit, but I feel that the source of everything is a God is a being of pure love. I feel that we are expressions of that ultimate reality seeking to express itself in material form. That's how I understand it. And so we are pure love seeking to come through us. And we just need to look at that positively. And we all do things that are, you know, wrong. We all make mistakes. And, you know, I've told you I've worked with troubled children. I learned very much that children who've been brought up in dysfunctional families are likely to take their inner pain and their suffering and lash it out onto others. And I've always believed that no one does harm to others if they feel good about themselves. So what we need to do is to create a world where everybody feels good about themselves. And that means to create a world where everybody feels love and security and attention. And it's not a child's fault if they are born into a world where they don't have that kind of experience. And it's likely to, the cycle is likely to go on. If a child is born into a dysfunctional family and grows up, and then they're likely to carry that pain into the adult world, and they're likely to continue to express that in their families in dysfunctional ways. I don't see that as their fault, in inverted commas, and to put blame on anybody for some of their behaviors. I've seen children and adults act out in very inappropriate ways, but if you learn what their experience of their childhood was, you can understand why they're behaving in that kind of way. And I think the way to do something about that is to enable them to experience love, to get into situations where they're given positive attention, where they're, the positive aspects of life are spoken, and that's the way forward with them. I just don't think it's healthy for anyone to be told you were born sinful and you need to absolve your guilt, and for that to be seen as a major aspect of their lives. Does that answer you, Michael?
Sure, Joan, yeah, and I agree with you.
Thank you.
Joan knows I'm a Jesuit priest.
Well, and there are aspects of Christianity. I mean, just to let you know also that one of my experiences when I went to university, I did a year on the study of religions. Now, all I'd known up to that point was a kind of doctrinal form of Christianity and a fairly strict version of it. So when I started study of religions, I found out about the Eastern philosophies, which, took a very different approach. But I also looked at expanded understandings of Christianity and read Teilhard de Chardin and Paul Tillich and Dietrich Bonhoeffer. So I became much more appreciative of wider dimensions of Christianity, and now I just say that it's the principles. If people are coming from this sacred inclusion is about diversity. That used to be in your title. I think the diversity of experience, diversity of beliefs, diversity of ways of understanding the world is so important, and we need to listen to each other in that. And as long as love and compassion and mutual care and is at the core, I celebrate different ways of interpreting the world that we live in. Anything else at this stage? Okay, what I'm going on to do then is more kind of, I don't know how many of you are into Angelo has put in here reviewing recent research that challenges the conventional view of consciousness as solely a product of brain activity. So I don't know how many of you are kind of very aware of all the research that's gone on, but I'm just intending to go through some of that in case you're not, because there's masses of it. So is everybody happy with that? Are you happy that I go on to that?
Sure.
Okay, so let me share my screen now and just hope that this works. I'm going to show right. There is masses of evidence that the brain does not produce consciousness. And there's absolutely no evidence that the brain does produce consciousness. Can I really just stress that? There is no evidence. People have tried to prove it for decades and they can't do it. And in fact, there are more and more scientists who are coming around to the fact that that it's not possible to prove. And yet our society and many people have been, and I'm going to use the word brainwashed or indoctrinated into the belief that matter is the primary element of the universe. There are libraryfuls of evidence. So it's not that there's a lack of evidence. The problem is that as a society, the belief that matter is primary has been so deeply embedded that people take it for granted, and they've been taught it since the day they were born. And, you know, the Richard Dawkins of this world get really angry when that kind of belief is challenged. And there's examples of people like the scientist who was asked, have you ever looked at the evidence and to say different? And he says, of course I haven't looked at the evidence. It's not possible. So it's not worthwhile taking the time to look at the evidence. So because there's so much, let's see whether I can move this down. I'm really just going to refer you, if you're interested in the evidence, to the work of Jeff Mishlove, who some of you may have heard of, but there was a prize, a competition for the person who could provide evidence of life after death by someone called Robert Bigelow, who I think had lost his son and was trying to work out whether he thought his son was still around beyond death. And so he set up this competition, and Jeff Mishlove won the £100,000 prize. And there's aspects of this that I'm not sure how I'm going to do this. Perhaps I've got to do it one slide at a time. And so this slide here tells you where all that different evidence comes from. It's not just from one point, but physical mediumship, mental mediumship, instrumental transcommunication, reincarnation, after-death communications, near-death experiences. There's been scientific evidence taken about this traditional science, with plenty of evidence to support death beyond the brain. And I'm just going to, life beyond the death of the brain. So I'm just going to play 3 short clips. One with Eben Alexander, that some of you might know. And first of all, let's just see this, and hopefully you'll be able to hear this. And he gives what he feels to be evidence.
Realm into this beautiful gateway valley that in many ways was much more real than this world. And it was a world with beautiful, lush plant growth everywhere, and all of it growing, very dynamic and actively growing. There were no signs of death or decay anywhere. And I remember sparkling blue waterfalls into these crystal blue pools. And there were thousands of beings down below us, all dancing. And when I came back to this world and tried to put words to it and tried to write all this down, I labeled those as souls between lives. They were dressed in kind of very simple kind of peasant garb, but in beautiful colors, colors beyond the rainbow. And there was lots of joy and merriment going on. There were children playing and dogs jumping, incredible festivities down below. And I was witnessing it because I was a speck of awareness on a butterfly. And on this butterfly wing, there were millions of other butterflies, and they were looping and spiraling in these vast formations. And I remember witnessing all that. And the reason all this was so natural and seemed perfectly real to me was because up above were these swooping orbs, golden orbs of light, each one seeming to be a pure spiritual essence. And they were leaving these sparkling golden trails against this blue-black velvety sky. And the entire scene was just lit by these billowing clouds of pure color. But these swooping orbs up above were emanating chants and anthems and hymns that would just thunder through my awareness and just resonate, this incredible power of oneness, of identification. It's one of the reasons why it's so difficult to explain these journeys is we're not just seeing with the eyes or hearing with the ears, which are very kind of filtered and limited sensory modalities. And in these realms, in these spiritual realms, we become all of it. You can essentially see through everything because you're becoming it and forming this beautiful model of all of it that transcends four-dimensional space-time. It's an extremely elaborate form of knowing.
Okay, so that's Eben Alexander who, God, now I've got the challenge of finding my way back, okay, who was, I think he was a surgeon himself, and he was an atheist until he had his near-death experience and had a different kind of experience. And so here's another one, someone called Elizabeth Crone. This is just 46 seconds, but again, it's an out-of-body experience that she had. Oops.
I kind of looked to the right about 20 feet, and there was just this heap on the pavement, and it was me. I was looking at me, and I saw that the soles of my gorgeous new shoes had been blown off, and my feet were burned and were sticking out of the bottom of the shoes. And I was upset about the shoes, so I looked down where I was in the lobby and saw that my shoes were fine. They were perfect. They were on my feet. They were perfect. The thing was, my feet weren't touching the ground. I was hovering a couple of inches off the ground.
So that was another out-of-body experience. If you go on to YouTube, for those who don't already, but if anyone who wants to hear that and just put near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, remote viewing, some of you may have heard of the telepathy tapes. The telepathy tapes are making kind of quite a storm at the moment, and I'm very happy to give a link to people who want to know more, but it's basically showing that there are autistic children, non-speaking autistic children. It has been proven that they can be telepathic. And once you start proving telepathy, it shows that there is something going on in reality that we don't truly understand. Now, and I'm just going to do one more clip, and this is Jeff Kripal, who works a lot with different kinds of experiences. He gives an explanation here as to why he thinks people are so reluctant to listen to the evidence. Oops. This is...
The social censor is so powerful, and it represses these stories. And so we then think, oh, these are rare, kind of anecdotal, tangential stuff that we don't really need to think about. No, these are as common as human beings are. They happen every day, every minute, all over the world. And the only reason we don't realize that is because of this social censor that's like pushing, keeping them all down.
It's a taboo of some sort that is implicit.
We're afraid of our own supernatures, essentially.
Yeah.
And so we imagine they're rare and unusual and weird when actually they're us. That's who we really are. That's what we're really capable of.
And
okay, so that's Jeff Kripal. So what I'm going to do now, before I open it up again for discussion, is I'm going to just give you, if I can get out of this. For some reason, it always seems to go away from my own. There we are. I can come back to Bohm later. So what I want to do here is just tell you what is my kind of the relationship between consciousness and spirituality, as that is a main theme of this webinar. So the conclusion I have come to over time, and this was greatly helped by the special interest group that I was part of with Innis, is that there's these two words, ontology and epistemology, which are probably two of the most difficult words in the English language. And ontology is basically what our theory about reality is. So to take science's ontology is that the universe was created at the time of the Big Bang, that the laws that have determined the rest of the universe were inbuilt into the Big Bang. And since then, the laws that were there right at the beginning have determined everything that's happened since then. If we can find out what those laws are, we will be able to understand all about what it means to be material beings, and we will be able to predict everything that happens in the future. It's a deterministic way of understanding reality. And in this ontology, at a late stage of the evolutionary process, consciousness emerged from the brain. So consciousness is a late emergence, but actually it's all that we experience in consciousness. Our feelings and emotions are illusory. At the point of death, we will die, and that will be it. If you take a kind of fundamental Christian ontology, and I'm talking about a fundamental and extreme Christian ontology, the ontology is that God created the universe. He did so in 7 days. He observes and kind of judges us, and when we die, we will go to either heaven or hell. And that's the theory of reality. Epistemology is how we come to know that universe, that reality. So epistemology for science is the experiment, the traditional experiment. You create a hypothesis, you set up the experiment to test the hypothesis, you get evidence either for and against, and your aim is to create evidence that means that the knowledge that you give is predictable and replicable, because we can discover laws that will enable us to understand everything, the theory of everything. In relation to the fundamental Christian approach, the way we get to know about reality is through the Bible. The Bible is the word of God, and in the Bible, that is how you come to know what God says and what he requires of us. So those are two differences, and I've just given those examples to give you a kind of sense of what ontology and epistemology is. The kind of ontology that I've come to is, I say consciousness is ontology. So my belief and understanding of reality is that consciousness is a universal energy which is infinite and eternal. There are no boundaries, there is no separation. It just is, and always has been. It has the integral qualities of love, pure love, and creativity. It's essentially creative, and it has intelligence. It contains all that is and ever has been. So everything that we have experienced as human beings is contained with this eternal and infinite consciousness, which means that this session, this meeting, this conversation that we'll have here is contained within that ultimate consciousness. And we as human beings, if we're open to it, we can draw on that wisdom, collect. So it's a learning process. If we're open to that expanded reality, we can gain, we can be guided in what we do from there. So it's a kind of ongoing iterative form of learning where our experience will also contribute to the learning of future generations. And so it's really worth putting an effort into so that we can help move human existence on in a positive way. We as human beings are each expressions of this infinite and eternal reality. So it moves away from the kind of Christianity I was brought up in, which says that I and God are separate. And it is basically saying, and I know many people from a religious perspective see this as blasphemous, really, but it's what I feel is that we are actually unique expressions of this infinite reality. We are, and I could use the word God, and sometimes I will, but the word God is interpreted in so many ways. Karen Armstrong wrote a book about it that I'm loath to use the term just because of the different ways of interpreting it. But I do see this as being a form of ultimate divine reality, and so we are each unique expressions of that ultimate loving source of being. And the consciousness and memories that we experience in this embodied existence is retained in the universal consciousness following death of the body. So there is a way of having a relationship with, communicating with what who we are here and how we pass on in beyond our physical death. So no memory, no experience, no relationship is ever lost. And then I see spirituality as epistemology. So I see this as the different, unique, but equally valuable ways in which human beings experience and come to know that universal consciousness. And so that can be traditional forms, prayer, meditation, religious ritual, but also it can be just through any ways in which we choose to connect with a wider dimension in ourselves. So going out in nature, being in the garden, and even being with young children. I very often think that young children are our greatest teachers. If you've ever looked into the eyes of a young child, there seems to me to be a kind of innocence and a purity of knowing that is awe-inspiring, can be awe-inspiring. And if you just allow yourself to experience that, it can have an enormous impact. Good art, I think the reason why people gravitate to art, to music, to dance, is that they're all ways in which you, in a sense, can move into a different state of consciousness. And to me, it's a state of consciousness that allows us to connect with more closely the ultimate source of our being. So that's where I see the difference in the relationship between consciousness and spirituality, and where my own spiritual journey has taken me over the years to that kind of intellectual understanding. So again, would just like to open this up now, because I realize it's 5 o'clock. We've got half an hour left, so I'd kind of welcome questions or discussions. Have I silenced everybody?
I can say something here.
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, it seems to me that, the scientists or those who have a scientific materialist, let's say, outlook, they're aware that people have had these experiences. However, what they do is they try to reduce them to certain material causes, physical, chemical, whatever, right? And therefore they have elaborate explanations about, well, perhaps this is how you could explain, say, a near-death experience, for example. And they've published a lot of books on this kind of a thing. So what is then the answer to them? I think that's quite interesting. Like, well, have you really proven your case that there are material causes? And you could get into some interesting arguments there and show them how they haven't, for example.
Well, I think what I would do is, because many people, will make a generalized statement like that, I would just say, provide me any evidence whatsoever that what you're saying has truth in it. And provide evidence for your alternative explanation. So just to tell you how seriously this has gone, because leading edge scientists are really changing their mind. It's all moving in the one direction. I've known a number of really good leading edge scientists who shifted their mind to believe that matter is not primary. I haven't actually known of a really good scientist who's gone the other way. And so just to give one example, there's a scientist called Christof Koch, who some of you might have heard of, and a philosopher, David Chalmers. And 26 years ago now, at a conference, a Science of Consciousness conference, they took a bet. Christof Koch said that in 25 years, we will have provided evidence of how the brain produces consciousness. And David Chalmers says, I'm not so sure about that. And 25 years later, which was last year, at a conference, Christof Koch had to present a box of wine to David Chalmers because he had not yet managed to prove that, and no one has managed to prove that the brain produces consciousness. But even more significantly than that, Christof Koch has himself now changed his views. So he's no longer pursuing that. He himself has had exceptional spiritual experience, and that has set him off in the direction of exploring what that means. And he is now exploring the idea that consciousness may be fundamental and not a derivative of the brain. So that is the direction that the really good science is going in. I've just been to the Science of Consciousness conference in Barcelona, the 31st one, and the shift in the last 2 or 3 years of people, mainstream scientists, changing their mind. And even Stuart Hameroff, who's the person who has started that conference 31 years ago, or 1994, I think was the first one. He's coming out quite openly now and saying that consciousness is fundamental, which he wouldn't have done a few years ago. So I would just say, you know, to people who keep trying to argue that, personally, I don't spend much of my time and energy. If I say to people, there's a lot of evidence there, and there's no evidence to suggest otherwise, and they're not prepared to look at that, if they just start going into, but perhaps it's this and perhaps it's that, and they're not prepared to go and look at the evidence, then I think, I'm sorry, I've got better things to do with my time. It's become a blind conviction. I think the problem is it's become a blind conviction. And that's why I'm kind of pointing out that it is worth reading that Jeff Mishlove essay. I would suggest anyone reads through all of that, because I've just shown 2 clips, but it's the 20,000 words where he works through all the different kinds of evidence. He gives clips of videos from lots of people over the years who are giving evidence of a different way of understanding the world. And if I defy anyone who reads that with an open mind and comes to the end not saying, oh, perhaps I need to rethink my materialist views.
Joan, you remind me, excuse me, you remind me, so I want to share that about 30 years ago, I and 3 other individuals were interviewed by Discovery Channel about our near-death experiences, and our humanness, our human personality and ego was so proud that finally this was going to be discussed, and they interviewed us. And then when we watched it, we realized they had totally betrayed us, because instead of showing our experiences as examples that it is beyond mind and science and physiology, they did the opposite, and they tried to prove that with drugs and electrical stimulation, etc., they could recreate exactly the same experiences. And we just felt so betrayed, until it took us together. We came together, and it only took us about 5 minutes of feeling this human of rejection, that we've suddenly realized, oh, who cares? What if they think they're right? We know exactly what our experience was, and it totally changed our life. So I'm disappointed that we even allowed ourselves to slip into the human debate over it. It's like, oh, I'm back. Are you back? Yes. So thank you.
I think it's understandable, Lewis, and I think things were different, very different 30 years ago as well.
That's right.
The experience wasn't so common. The grasp of materialism was much stronger and much more powerful. You did get people like, you know, many scientists honestly thought that we're on the verge of proving that the brain produces consciousness. It was a very different era. I think I'd say, and at that point I would probably have been drawn into discussion, because there wasn't a huge amount of, there's still evidence, but not the volumes that there exists now. So I think you can let yourself off the hook for that.
And we
I
did
think
very
I'd,
quickly. Yeah.
I think I'd have done the same.
I want to ask a very different question, Joan. Many of us probably on this call are meditators.
Yeah.
I'm curious as to how can I pinpoint this question? So many people, they meditate because it just makes them calm. And you alluded to other dimensions of consciousness, let's say. So I wonder if you could just talk maybe generally about the uses of meditation and how people might maybe think about practicing it better in a more way that might be comprehensible. In other words, not explainable in terms of scientific terminology. Let's call it. Not that that's important, but I'm just curious as to your.
Well, I'm not sure how much I can do it in scientific terminology. If I just before I do that, and I will, I'm just going to talk about how many people on this call have heard of Federico Fagin? Has anybody? Yeah, you have. Anybody else? Just one person. Okay. I'm a great fan of Federico Fagin at the moment, mainly because he's 83 at the moment, and now he is the originator of the microprocessor. He spent his adult life to his mid-40s developing computers, and he did the touch screen, touchpad, etc. Moving from Italy to Silicon Valley, entrepreneur, making megabucks of money. And he came to a point of time in his life and he said, I'm successful, I've achieved so much, I've got a wonderful wife, I've got a wonderful family, I've got all the money I could want, all the success I could want, but I'm not happy. And I don't understand why I'm not happy. And he'd been trying to create the conscious computer and he wasn't having a success of it. And then one night he had a very profound spiritual experience. And he realized at that point in time that the origin, the source of the universe was pure love. That's where he comes to. And his ontology, the way of understanding the world that he's come to is in fact very, very close to mine. He believes that he talks about the one, which he sees as infinite and eternal, that it's pure love, that it has free will, and that we are the ones seeking to know itself. And he's spending his life at the moment going around talking about this. I think the value of him is that he's very grounded in science. His last book, Irreducible, is an attempt to show the science behind that and to explain. And he's doing another book which explains how this kind of spiritual worldview is scientifically valid. And that's why I think he's got a lot to be commended. He's bringing these kind of ways of understanding the world. But he talks about the need to develop create an expanded science that includes interiority as well as exteriority. And that's the bit that I'm picking up and working with. I'm seeking to work more to develop an expanded science that includes interiority as well as exteriority. Now, why I think I've said this in relation to a response to your question, Angelo, is that I think to me that meditation is about going within. Meditation is about experiencing as purely as you can your interiority and bracketing out your exteriority. I'm not a conventional meditator. I know there are many people who have a set time, they'll meditate for a set time, they've got a particular ritual, they'll sit in a particular place, they'll sit in a particular posture. That is not my way of doing things, actually. I'm not saying I shouldn't, there's no criticism here whatsoever. You're just asking me to share my understanding and my experience. I'm absolutely not saying I'm right or it's the best way or whatever. But because of where my ontology is, my aim is to withdraw internally as deeply as possible and to connect with that sense of an infinite, eternal, loving universe as deeply as possible. And I develop certain practices that enable that to happen. So that might mean going into my garden and just sitting in my garden. It might even mean being on my swing chair and just allowing it to swing a bit. It might be going, it's certainly somewhere quiet. It's certainly somewhere where I'm physically comfortable. I make sure I'm physically comfortable, and it is an acceptance. And sometimes actually I say that I feel my life is a kind of living prayer. And what I mean by that is, as I live in each moment, I'm aware of being an expression of this infinite and eternal reality. And it's a constant seeking to be in the world in a way that that wider reality is wanting me to be. So if I'm saying that I see our purpose for being here is to express in as pure a form as possible that ultimate loving and creative reality source of being, God, if you like to use that word, then I'm just in each moment seeing how I can do that more purely and seeking to do that better. And then if things are happening in the world that are not going well or not happening badly, I'll kind of say, I'll just look at whether I can improve what I'm doing in some kind of way. But that idea of meditation, Angelo, it's for me, I just translate that about going deeply into myself to connect with that ultimate source, and perhaps exploring different ways of doing that, not conforming to someone else's right way, not conforming to someone says this is what you should do in meditation. In a sense, I trust my own experience. I'm trying to find out through my own experience the best ways of doing that for myself, being aware that I'm trying to enact a good relationship between my interiority and my exteriority, to use Fijine's terms. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's helpful. I was actually thinking as you were talking, and as you express your form of meditation, whatever you want to call it, it's really about getting in touch with the love, the universal love that you're talking about.
Yeah.
So often meditators have this kind of interiority. It's just their bubble, their way, getting in touch with and being calm. That's fine, but personally, I don't think that's sufficient.
I think you summarized that well. I would see it as connecting as closely as I can to the loving source of our being. And so love is very important in that. Any other questions or comments?
Can I make a comment there, Joan?
Please
just
do,
to say,
Ruth.
thank you very much. That was really, really interesting. And I was at the INSS conference recently, and I enjoyed a lot of papers around consciousness, etc. But I did feel that you've really highlighted something which for me was missing, which, I mean, as has been said already, it's that link to the idea of source, that I link to the idea of source of love. And I mean, I work with students, and, we've tried some meditation with them and not had great results, but I always think if the meditation doesn't bring you into a place of connecting to a source of love, if it's just bringing you into kind of a barren emptiness, for me, certainly there's a piece missing, and, there's missing out. And I suppose that's where we're at currently in a kind of a secular society, that kind of missing out piece. So it's been really refreshing for me to hear you, Joan, kind of saying very overtly what this all means to you, and it resonates very strongly with me. So thanks very much.
And thank you for highlighting that, because in a sense, Angelo flagged me up as someone on the kind of leading edge of researching this, and I'm not sure whether it's the leading edge, but it's certainly, I feel I'm trying to move the whole study of consciousness in a particular direction. There are many people studying consciousness who are coming from a materialist perspective, for example, and people who are coming to the study of consciousness and don't think about spirituality. And on the other hand, I think for people coming from a spiritual context, if you bring in consciousness, because that's what we experience, we're all experiencing consciousness, that's what we share. Every part of our experience requires consciousness. If we didn't have consciousness, we wouldn't be here having this. We have it all in common, and it is more obvious and more present to me than the concept of spirituality. But for me, the consciousness is the access to that more spiritual perspective. So understanding our experience of consciousness, if we start with our experience of consciousness, it then takes me into a spiritual experience. And that's why I see the relationship between them as being entwined, and why I'm trying to progress an understanding of reality that demonstrates that relationship. And I think it's a way of bringing people who, spirituality is still often seen as a bit of a woo-woo term. It's not very specific. What does it actually mean? When people start trying to define spirituality, I've been part of lots of people, we need to define it, and it just gets into a tortured place. Whereas when people share spiritual experiences, they're often able to do so as long as they don't have to define it. But it's a very kind of vague word that many people don't like and tend to avoid. So I think this is a way of bringing it, if you do it through a relationship with consciousness, and we can't deny that we all have consciousness, we just can't deny it. And then you start exploring your experience of consciousness, and you start exploring spiritual experiences that you might have in consciousness, then suddenly you're bringing spirituality and your own experience of consciousness. You can't separate the two. So it is a different way into an understanding of spirituality. And it all starts with personal experience. I mean, another thing that Fagin says, actually, even in his model, is this expanded science should start with experience. And that's partly why I started by sharing my experience. And if we were to meet on a regular basis, for example, I would be saying, come on, let's hear everybody's story. How do you come to be here today? And how do you become interested in this topic? And all your stories are unique. But I think we learn more about spirituality and consciousness by sharing our stories than we do by, well, what's your theory about it all? Because very soon when people talk about theories of it all, you start to yawn and switch off. Whereas when people are sharing stories and experiences, they're more likely to get engaged and to get drawn in and to have really interesting discussions about what it means and how they respond to other people's stories. So in a sense, the whole way my research goes is to encourage us to research it more through individual stories, and then look at what kind of common themes come through, what is common and what is different.
Joan, may I ask a question about, I think it'll relate to spirituality and your own experience as you described it earlier. I hope I understood it, that you're not a focused meditator who has particular practice times and so forth that you go through, but you experience spirituality, you experience meditation moments throughout the day and in various activities and in prayer. As you pray, I'm a lapsed Catholic from way back when, so I prayed to a male god at the time. I'm not there now, but I'm curious about your own prayer. Are you praying to another being? Are you praying simply to, and how do you think of it as you try to reach pure love and expand your consciousness through those daily meditative moments that you experience? What's the prayer process, basically?
Oh, well, thank you for raising that. I use the word pray with hesitation. I'm not quite sure what other word to use. It's not, prayer is probably not the right word, Emil. I think I'm just trying, given that I believe that we're all integral to this infinite, eternal, loving reality, right? It's there, and it's seeking, and it's wanting to express itself purely in material form. It's wanting to come through us purely, so that we are expressions of pure love, and we are creative beings, so we can express that in many, many different and creative ways. So I suppose my prayer is just allow me to be as open as possible to listening to what it is that is being said to me. I don't even want to say to what you are saying to me, because that sounds like there's a separation, and I'm not seeing a separation. It's almost like the analogy often is the wave and the sea. You know, the wave separates off a bit and then goes back in, and I'm a being that's attempting, as we all are, that's attempting to express itself. This loving, pure loving energy in material form, we're seeking to express itself, and I'm really just saying, please guide me, please guide me, please show me what best to do in this moment in time, and to draw on, just to be open to that infinity, to that eternity, to that pure love, and to seek to be a pure expression of that. So that's my prayer.
So it isn't to a being, some particular figure, godlike, who has influence and control over us, but it's to a more universal experience leading to pure love, that the prayer goes toward helping you continue on your journey.
It's to the source of my being, who I believe is the source of all of us. Mm-hmm. And I am an expression of that source. And I'm just asking for, but I am limited, because I do have, the brain does act as a channel, and the brain can make choices to go and do different things. And the brain could make a choice to go and be cruel and hostile and violent and angry. So in a sense, because my brain is a filter, my brain can push out some of those things. But I am not separate from that source, but I do, there are, the whole nature of the enterprise is that I have choices about how I behave. So I'm just seeking to be a channel that allows the most positive of those choices to be made.
Okay, thank you.
We're about at time, Joan. I wonder if anybody has last words.
Oh, wow, so we are. Wow. Well, we are, yes. If anybody hasn't, I hope, I didn't know who you were as an audience and what your expectations were, so I hope I have been and done something that you're happy with, and that has given you something to take away and think about.
Appreciated your starting out with your own personal experiences, and that's what touches everybody. That was actually riveting for me. Wasn't pedantic. It wasn't this theory or that theory, which you had indicated. That kind of thing is just mind-boggling, and it puts you to sleep. So it was I really appreciated that. I really did.
Okay.
So thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine. And I think I would just encourage everybody to start with your own experience and develop your own way. That's what I said. I've given you my understanding where I've come to, but if you remember what I said in that special interest group, looking at the relationship between consciousness and spirituality, although it was a very profound and connecting experience for all of us, and we got closer, we didn't come to an agreed outcome. And the webinar at the end gave 7 different stories of what it meant to us. So I just think there's something about diversity and unity. We can be it's really important for each person to develop their own way of understanding reality and their own spiritual practices, and not just to conform to what some kind of outside belief system states to you. So I would just encourage you all to write your own narrative.
So I noticed Lewis just put a reference to the book I think that Joan mentioned, and Joan also mentioned this webinar with all these several different speakers, and I will share that with everybody on this call and in the email.
I just say there
Thank
that in an MA program that I'm involved in running, we start the program. The first module is people writing their own spiritual, well, it's their own, obviously, writing their spiritual autobiography, precisely because we think yes, everything needs to be grounded in one story.
And
hello,
I have
Michael.
a huge respect
Michael,
for you.
Kevin,
say
you've
hello
got
to
the
Michael?
program. Yeah, how are you?
I could just say hello to Michael, and I endorse that. It was a great experience.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah.
I can say the same, and thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Livia. Yeah.
I also attest to the same too, yes. Mighty experience.
Right. Aye.
Well, thank you, everyone. It's been a joy to have this time with you.
Thank you, Joan.
Thank you.